In this video, you're going to see an OEM 256 gear setup in a 1977 Camaro replaced with a 373 limited slip differential system. In the interest of time, I'm not going to film the entire disassembly process, but as you're watching this video clip of the removal of the differential cover, the draining of the gear oil, and the inspection of the original OEM differential, I will be putting together the pinion with setup bearings where I used what's called a sand flap wheel to hone out the center of the bearing to make the setup bearings. In doing so, we were able to measure the pinion depth, and you'll see as well the measurements of the backlash using the initial setup. Enjoy the video. Checking backlash. What do you got there?
94, 88 to 93.
6,000, perfect. Now we're going to do our marking compound test. All right, gonna prep this thing for install. Using our favorite brakes parts cleaner. Brand new races, both inner and outer. Here are the shims for our pinion gear shim pack. 5 shims. Zeroed out. We have 0.07 inches on the nose. All right, here's our new pinion gear with the setup bearing that we used to size. And as you can see, it does have a snug fit, but we had to hollow this out to make it our setup bearing. Here's the new bearing, and our new bearing does not seat. It's a pressure fit, but it's super tight. So that's why we had to hollow this guy out when we were testing it. So what we're going to do is heat this guy up in a conventional oven or toaster for about 5 minutes or so at about 400 degrees, and it will slide right. All right, there we go, 400 degrees, counting down from 4 minutes. There she is. All right, we're gonna make sure we're gonna clean our mating surface really good because thousandths of an inch count. Now we're gonna apply our shim pack. And there it is. Full transparency, I put the pinion in the freezer for the same amount of time I had the bearing in the oven, because the first time I did it, it didn't actually slide on. So the heat expanding the bearing coupled with the freezer contracting the pinion shaft was all it took. All right, got all the tools out. We're going to reassemble the rear diff. Last we had our bearing put on. Shouldn't install bearings dry. So I'm just going to grab some of this 75 W90 gear oil. They like that. All right, so our pinion is prepped and ready. First step is our new crush sleeve. Cannot reuse your crush sleeve. Does not have memory. Once crushed, you're done. So the seat's on there. That's why the pinion nut doesn't have a torque spec. You'll tighten it until you have a certain amount of resistance once it crushes the sleeve. So we'll go ahead and install this after we prep the rear of the differential. All right, got our rear pinion bearing. Again, we don't want to stall these dry, so I'm going to try to do this on camera. Got it pre-lubed with the 75W90. Gonna install that in the race. Bearing seal. You just put that in place. The inside surface of the bearing seal should also not be installed dry. So I'm going to take a little bit of the gear oil and just coat the inside. Of the bearing seal. Next, I got a cool bearing install kit. Gonna get the right size, which will fit over. And we're gonna tap this in. There we go. All right, now we're ready to install the new pinion. Crush washer in place. Followed by the yoke or pinion flange. Washer and pinion nut. This is a 33mm nut. Make sure you use a brand new nut. The goal is to get all this play out in addition to seating both bearings. All right, so the goal again is to crush the washer, get all that play out of there, and seat both bearings. As you can tell, I'm under a car, which is not ideal. It's much easier to do this on a lift with leverage, but I have this cool pinion tool that I saw online that I'm gonna give a shot here. Just take your yoke strap bolts to secure it. And then these are conveniently 1/2-inch drive holes. And then this arm right here, you can see that right here, can wedge under the frame. I have mine under the leaf spring. So when I torque this, when I torque the pinion bolt down, that'll be held under the leaf spring. So again, great thing to use when you're by yourself and need that extra leverage. All right, so you can see the configuration better. I've got a breaker bar in between the leaf spring and the frame, which is attached to the pinion tool. I've got my 33mm socket and wrench. So as I'm tightening, this stays wedged against the car, and I can begin to add resistance by tightening that crush sleeve. So as you crank down on this nut, once you start feeling the crush sleeve compress, when you spin this, it won't spin freely. Right now I feel resistance. You can see there's resistance in there. All the play is gone, but the spec is 20 to 25 inch-pounds. So to measure that resistance, you have to use a beam style torque wrench. This beam style torque wrench measures inch-pounds and Newton meters. And you simply apply the torque wrench to the socket. And as you move this, you read the torque. So if you can read that, it's about 10 inch-pounds. As you crank, this will increase. You can't go back. So it's little cranks at a time. Remeasure until you're within the 20 to 25 inch-pound spec. I also wanted to show you that I have slightly different configuration on here. I have a breaker bar, a 1/2-inch drive breaker bar on this side, wedged between the chassis and leaf spring. On this side, I have a 1/2-inch drive connected to the 32mm socket with a long steel tube extension to give me leverage. Because at this point, I'm probably applying, I would guess, about 150 pounds of force. Okay, I literally did another half turn at most. First, let me spin this some more. Definitely more resistance. Zero play. Just working in those bearings as they seat onto the races. All right, let's give that a measurement. That's perfect. 25 pounds. It's absolutely perfect. Sorry about the camera work. I was trying to read this as I went. You can kind of see that right there. 26 pounds. Perfect. I'd rather be on the higher side because as these bearings seat, it may move another couple inch-pounds. So we are set to insert the carriage and ring gear. All right. I know I said carriage in that last segment, but it's carrier. We're ready for the carrier install. Got the bearings mounted previously. We're going to, again, pre-lube these. Not easy one-handed, but we're getting there. All right. Also, videos, pictures, and labeling are some of the most important things when you're doing car work. You never know how much time is going to elapse between when you disassemble everything and reassemble, and trust me, you won't remember. So what I've got here are the bearing cap brackets. I actually have a P etched here and an up arrow for passenger side, a D and an up arrow for driver's side. Just in case, I've got my bolts with a single dot and a double dot, single for up, 2 dots for the bottom, single for the top, 2 dots for the bottom. So I've got everything labeled and ready to go. So let's go ahead and install. All right, ready to install the carrier. Got our pinion gear in, snug nicely. 26 inch-pounds per spec. I'm gonna grab my carrier assembly with the bearing caps and the shim packs and try to install it all in one shot. Highly recommend this great trick. .14mm wrench. Secure the carrier so it doesn't fall out and injure me. Using a little brass drift so I don't hurt the shim pack. So after installing the carrier, I ended up with very little backlash, almost zero. So in order to increase backlash, you have to decrease the shim pack thickness on the ring gear side and increase the shim pack thickness on the opposite side, the exact same measurement. The only thing you have to be cautious about is, was it truly zero backlash or was it excessive bearing preload? So we're gonna test that out. So here's the shim packs that I had initially. Each side had 104 thousandths and 97 thousandths shims, respectively, for a total of 201 thousandths on each side. I am going to remove 7 thousandths from the ring gear side and place it over to the other side. In doing so, I'm literally just going to move the 104 thousandths shim from the driver's side and bring the 97 thousandths shim from the passenger side over to the driver's side. So now my new driver's side shim pack is 194 thousandths. My new passenger side shim pack is 208 thousandths. The overall is the same. And if in fact there's a 1-to-1 correlation between shim pack movement and backlash, I should have approximately 7 thousandths of an inch of backlash. The spec for that car and that carrier in that diff is 4 to 9 thousandths, which would put us smack in the middle. So we'll give that a shot. All right, I got my new shim pack settings in. I'm gonna torque these down in a star pattern. Always start with the non-ring gear side so you don't bind the ring gear against the pinion. All right, now we got to torque them down to 60 foot-pounds. $16mm. All right, now we want to measure our backlash. Spec is between 4 and 9 thousandths. I'm going to use a dial indicator. This one's magnetic, which is great for diffs. Set that to 0. That is 7 thousandths. That is perfect, right in between spec. Still a few thousandths of play left for when the diff settles and all the bearings settle into their races. Love it. Next, we're going to check the gear pattern using compound to see how they line up between the ring gear and the pinion gear. To do so, we're going to use some compound. I'm going to paint both sides of the teeth. That would be the drive side and the coast side, so we can check the pattern on both sides. When you paint the teeth, you want to paint a nice complete coating, but a thin coating. I'll go ahead and do 4 teeth. Completely coated, nice and thin. Now we're going to engage the pinion and ring gear together, and while doing so, we're going to put pressure on the ring gear so we can make a nice pattern. This is absolutely perfect. So what we're looking for in the pattern is a football shape. It's in the center of the tooth between the heel and the toe. That one didn't come in too well. I might run that one again. Stand by. I may have coated too much of the compound on there, but it's absolutely perfect. Dead center in between the heel and the toe. Halfway between the root and the top. It's exactly what we want. Both sides. Dead center. It's a go. All right, the next step is to prepare for the axle install. And to do so, we have to remove this pin, which is what keeps the axles separate from each other. So to do that, we need to rotate the carrier to this side, which has the through bolt to secure the pin in place. That's a 8mm bolt. It's a very long bolt that breaks easy, so be very careful. Once you do that, this should slide right through. As you see there, there's a hole where the through bolt goes through. And now that we have that removed, we're going to rotate this. So we have access to the axles and the C-clips when installing. All right, here's my axle all clean. Note that the spline end is one that comes with a different number of splines. I believe this one's 31. But make sure this mates up to your carrier splines before the install. Also, after cleaning up, this is the mating surface of the bearing. And you can see it's a little worn. These are old axles. This is from a 77 Camaro, so I went ahead with what we call repair or rescue bearings, which is a bearing and seal combination that actually relocates the bearing location along the axle so it'll contact a new surface in case this is a little bit worn. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, I've thoroughly cleaned the inner surface of the axle tube, but again, it may be worn over time. So the instructions actually call for coating the outside with a thin layer of silicone seal. So I've got a little silicone right here. Just gonna get a very small layer and just coat the outside. Super thin coat. Then I'm going to apply the inner rubber surface where the axle slides along on both sides, because that's easily damaged and it's just rubber, with some more gear oil. Again, you never want to install these dry. These repair bearings are pre-coated on the inside with grease. There's my thin layer of silicone, coating of gear oil on the rubber interior. Line this up evenly. Gonna get my race install tool from earlier. Now we're gonna tap until you hear the sound change to a thud, which is when the bearing will reach the shoulder within the axle tube. Hear that sound change? It's hit the shoulder. So we have our repair bearing seal combo installed. You can see it extends about a 1/4 inch That's per spec. It should extend between 1/8 and 1/4 inch. And we are good to go to install the axle. All right, now we're going to install the axle. Again, before doing so, to avoid dry contact, we're going to put a little gear oil on the splines. And also on the bearing mating surface. And ever so carefully installed. Once the axles are installed, we're going to secure them in place with C-clips. You can see the axle end right there. And there's a small recessed lip, and that's where the C-clips go. I don't have new C-clips, so I'm going to repurpose the old C-clips by flipping them around. You can see by the witness markings here, the old wear pattern of the lip on the axle. So I'm going to put this shiny side facing in, which will basically renew them. I'm going to use a little magnetic clip here. To get it in place. And then you just need to push the axle outward like so to lock it in place. Repeat on the other side. Okay, once we install the C-clips, we're going to push the axles outward to their respective sides. If it gives you a little trouble, because sometimes you can't push them with your fingers, you can always put in a little pry bar in there and assist them through. Next, we're going to install the carrier pin, which will sit in between the two axles like that to prevent them from moving. To do so, we have to rotate the carrier to the side with the hole for that securement screw right there. Here's our pin. Side with the hole will go outward. Slide that in. It's a machine fit, so it's a little snug. Make sure you line up your hole with the opening. Sometimes it's good to put a mark. If you can see there, there's a red mark, red line to line it up. Here's the retaining bolt. I am going to put a little bit of thread locker on there, just a tiny bit. Like so. Again, 8mm. And I'm actually going to get a longer extension because the ratchet will hit against this housing. Okay, we're back with the longer extension. There is no torque spec for this bolt. It doesn't need to be super tight. Use common sense. They do break easy. There is thread locker on there. Snug with a wrench is all you need. Okay, now we're ready to replace the gasket and diff cover. Here's my cover. Just use some nice brake parts cleaner, cleaned it off. Around these holes, sometimes you get gasket residue build up, so it's not flush. So you can either very carefully take a blade or some kind of abrasive material like a scrubbing pad and clean it off and then apply. I don't use any gasket seal on this particular one, but you can if you absolutely want to. And then these are 1/2-inch bolts, and they should be torqued to 30 foot-pounds in a star pattern. All right, once the diff cover is on, we can fill the differential with gear oil. There's a fill plug on the side here. It's got a 3/8-inch drive hole. On a 10-bolt rear, 8.5-inch ring gear, the capacity is about 2.5 to 3 quarts. Here's the magnetic drain plug. Small little bits of metal debris. Just going to clean that off before we reinstall it. In the meantime, we're going to add our gear oil. My favorite kind is the soft pouches, so you can fit them in tight areas and roll them as you use them. And don't forget, since this is a limited slip differential that we just installed, you must put in your LSD additive. Once the drain hole starts to leak, you are full. There is a break-in period with a new rear differential and ring gear and pinion gear. It's very important that for your first 15 to 20 minutes you drive very conservatively. After that, allow the car to cool back down for about 30 to 60 minutes. And then continue to drive extremely conservatively for the next 100 miles or so. Try not to do any burnouts or serious pulls. For the next 400 miles after that, you'll want to drive conservatively as well. You can have some harder accelerations, but at the end of 500 miles, it's important that you change the gear oil again, as when new gears mate, there are metal filings that result, sometimes hard to see, but they do work their way in, and the teeth work against each other So it is recommended as a break-in period after 500 miles to change your gear oil. That is it. Gonna reinstall the drive shaft, drums, tires, and hit the road. By the way, one more trick I forgot to mention is this is a small rigid bottle and it's not always easy to get this in the diff. In fact, it's next to impossible to pour it into the hole, which is a vertical hole. So when you're filling in, after you empty half of one of these bags or bottles, I would recommend taking the additive and literally pouring it in to the bag of the gear oil. And filling it up like so.